Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 25th of May 2024. A couple of points of note. I'm probably unlikely to be able to do a mapping update tonight. Lots of people around the house today, so on and so forth. So it's a little bit difficult for me to get the time. JR is off somewhere having hopefully a really good time at a place he's gone to today. So that's awesome. As me being not very specific about where he's gone. Also, I'm giving a talk, as I've mentioned, on June the 15th, I think it is, in North Hampshire. So that's a county in the UK. There is an email address below if you are interested in coming to do some fundraising for some drones for Ukraine. Then please come along to the talk I'm going to give on, as I say, 15th of June in the Andover sort of area of the UK. Right, okay, on with the news. And my goodness, there's a lot of news to go through. So actually, we're going to start with, just to remind you, the strikes on a shopping mall in Kharkiv that I did a breaking news piece on earlier. They then hit Kharkiv again just after that in the busiest central part of Kharkiv. This is just overt terrorism by the Russians, and my goodness, it's really frustrating. But it's really interesting that because I'm complaining, I'm looking at a few news sources and they're not featuring this. This is like a heinous act. Emmanuel Macron has come out and said something, and this is again good rhetoric from the French leader here. Russian strikes on a shopping mall in Kharkiv have resulted in many victims, including children, women, men, families. This is unacceptable. France shares the grief of the Ukrainians and remains fully mobilized to their side. So that's really good news from it's good to see him talk about that and put a statement out about that. Where have you seen really poignant silence from other mainstream media sources? Or not that he's a mainstream media source, but it's just really frustrating that as soon as something bad happens that Ukraine is involved in, then the Russians have attacked north of the border. They've attacked into Kharkiv. Doom, doom, doom. Oh my goodness, how terrible. Then now Ukraine has rebutted that attack and is pushing them back. What are they saying? Nothing. There's no kind of like, oh, well done for constraining them and pushing back. That's amazing, because that's a massive attack that we just doomed about just the other day. Then the Russians retaliate by spanking Kharkiv city centre with a bunch of massive munitions, and they don't bloody say anything. It's really, really frustrating. Right, okay. We'll start proper with the Russian economy here. So due to the deficit of blue-collar workers, Russian companies are forced to raise salaries by 20% year over year, says Stanimir Dobrev. But this is not enough, as such workers are often sought after by the military-industrial complex and companies in the occupied territories. There's a shortage of 2.5 to 5 million blue-collar workers in Russia. Some companies lost 70 to 80% of their workers who were lured to work in the occupied territories where they were immediately offered a new apartment and doubled their previous salary. According to Kommersant, so that's a Russian media source, factories are offering 200,000 rubles for specialists, and a lot prefer to work in the military-industrial complex on a rotational basis through factories that offer extra pay. Recruiting people from another region isn't the answer, as you have to provide a bonus for relocation and housing, so 70 to 80,000 rubles becomes 120 to 130,000 plus rent. In Moscow, it's even more difficult, with a company offering 250,000 for a lathe worker and not finding anyone. Another option is to deal with the shortage by employing migrant workers. However, after the terrorist attack on Krakow City Hall, that's become more difficult, especially for people experienced with working on industrial machines. I honestly see lots of low-paying jobs at factories, but these are remaining vacant, and some factories have hundreds of such open positions. You can go through my past posts and see how not all military industry can offer such salaries. So here's someone that's been looking into this and seeing that there is a really meaningful impact on the Russian economy. This war is affecting it hugely. The wage spiral is happening. That leads to inflation, which then leads to a further wage spiral. And you have just the shortage of labour giving that competition for those places. It's a real challenge for the Russians for sure. Right. His toad ship, the Hungarian dictator wannabe Viktor Orban here is working to redefine the country's NATO membership status to allow it to potentially opt out from the military alliance's deepening support for Ukraine. That's according to Viktor Orban. So there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, they are looking to change their NATO status so they don't have to be so anti-Russia. Well, that's kind of what NATO, that's its raison d'etre, right? But also, it's holding up the adoption of the law that would allow Ukraine to spend 2 billion euros on weapons from the profits of frozen Russian assets. Quote, at the moment, they are blocking everything related to military support for Ukraine, a source told the Financial Times. They are being bloody difficult, Hungary. And I'm getting to the stage, as I told you before, where it's like, just kick them out. Just get them out of the EU, get them out of NATO, and see what their population think and say, and see whether that's as popular for them as they would like. Yeah, you might be appeasing Putin, but you won't be appeasing your population when you are the second poorest nation in Europe, in the EU. Your economy, or the second worst economy, I think, in the EU. You are the top of the corruption index for European countries. It is not looking good for you, and there will be I think, a bit of a tipping point soon. Peter Magyar, who's the opposition leader in the making, appears to be gathering momentum with each successive week. Right. Sikorski, so the foreign minister for Poland, who is, I think, a splendid supporter of Ukraine. He's married to Anne Applebaum, the author and journalist and analyst. She is also a very strong supporter of Ukraine. He has had an interview with The Guardian today, which is a great read. The Americans have told the Russians that if you explode a nuke, even if it doesn't kill anybody, we will hit your targets in Ukraine with conventional weapons. We'll destroy all of them. Chinese and Indians have read Russia the right act, according to Sikorski. Now, we're going to look at this article in a second. This is interesting. Now, this is something I had reported maybe a year and a half ago, maybe even more. So in the very early stages of this war, when people were worrying about would Russia do nukes because Ukraine was starting to repel the Russian attacks, and they were having these growing successes, and everyone's thinking, oh, this is riling Russia. They're gonna go a bit nuke. They're rattling their sabers. And then what happened is, well, the word on the street was that the US went to Russia and said, behind the scenes, if you even use a tactical nuke on the battlefield, even if it doesn't kill anyone, we will destroy you. NATO will take you out in terms of, no, we won't hit you with nukes, but we will use conventional warfare and we will strike hard and fast. And there were claims that they had been threatened, the Russians had been threatened with having their entire fleet being taken out in one fell swoop. Here's Sikorski saying that the Americans had said, we're going to hit you in Ukraine, but we'll hit all of your targets, just be a massive, huge attack, which they could do very easily. So see how contested the airspace is right now. See how the Ukrainians are able to hit X, Y, and Z consistently, and that's with old school aircraft. Imagine what NATO and the US could do if they really put their mind to it. So they genuinely could just make, I think, a mockery of the Russian armed forces and the Air Force and actually their Navy. And so this then is a deterrent to Russia to use nukes, but also added to that is, and I hadn't heard the Indians putting pressure on them before, but certainly Chinese, it was rumoured, have put big pressures on them. There are different theories concerning that, but there's certainly a lot of people who say China are, and actually when you look at the rhetoric of China, they have been very strong. The only time they've strongly criticised Russia in this whole war, other than the general kind of we don't want war type thing, the overt criticism of Russia has been concerning the use of nuclear weapons. They have warned them publicly not to do that, and one would therefore assume that in private they've been very, very hard on the Russians there, and the Russians depend on the Chinese. And there are theories that this might have to do with the fact that the Chinese have control of 15% of the farmland in Ukraine through either outright buying or leasing. And one of the strategies for China has to really concern feeding their population. They have one of the biggest populations in the world. I think it's been overtaken by India just now. But, they're either the biggest or thereabouts, over 1 billion. they need to feed those people. That has to be like job number one of the government, is make sure that we don't have a famine, or like make sure our population doesn't starve. So part of their international strategizing is food security. So they've been going around for quite a long time. Strange enough, the British have been doing this as well. There's a lot of, if you look at the stats of who's bought up a lot of land around the world, British have been involved in that. Don't know what that's about. But anyway, the Chinese have been heavily involved in, we know the Belt and Road Initiative and infrastructure around the world, but actually securing food for their population has been a major thing. And if you had nuclear weapons used on that farmland in Ukraine, then that is actually hurting the Chinese ability to feed themselves. So Ukraine are one of the bread baskets of the world, and if you affect anything that they produce that goes out onto the international market, which is all of their food pretty much, yes, they feed themselves a bit, but generally one of the biggest exports are agri-produce, agricultural products. And so even if China doesn't take that stuff themselves, which I think they do an awful lot, but even if they don't, they will be going on the open market for food, and that price will be affected if the Ukrainian agricultural output is seriously affected. So this is really important for China, and nukes, and this goes back to why the red line won't be crossed. Like, Russia won't use nukes because they've been warned by everyone, their friends and their enemies, and they know in no uncertain terms that the mutually assured destruction, yes, that's one thing, like we're all going to die, but also even if we just use like one tactical nuke, our military will be absolutely hammered straight off the bat. And we saw the early warning radar system get hit by the Ukrainians yesterday. So I don't think the Russians are in a particularly strong position when it comes to their nuclear capabilities compared to the rest of the world. So here is the article in The Guardian. It is a good read. He is being very strong in support of Ukraine. He calls for a long-term rearmament of Europe, favours the deepest possible inclusion of the UK, interestingly, in EU defence structures. So with Brexit, obviously there are these issues of sharing intelligence, sharing security. How closely do we work with police in terms of migration? So now that we're out of touch with the French, as when we're in the EU, we worked much more closely with the French. We had organisations at the French ports like Calais, that stopped, and then we had loads more migration coming across the channel, and we were less able to do anything about it because of the effect of Brexit on that bilateral relationship. But so you've got all of these things: security, defence, etc. Brexit produces challenges, right? But now with Russia undermining the UK elections, arguably, and we'll come to that in a little while, we are vulnerable, and Europe is also vulnerable as well. And the closer we work with Europe, the more beneficial that will be for both the UK and the EU. They need us, and we need them. I think who needs one more than the other? I'm pretty sure we need Europe more than they need us in terms of just the sheer size and whatnot. But I reckon with the movement in the EU of these far right political parties gaining much more momentum, I think there will be a lot of people in Europe ruining that we left, because actually we were fairly stable. We've got fairly stable government. We aren't too susceptible to massive populism. You can argue that we kind of dabbled with it with Boris Johnson and even around the UKIP time, but essentially I think the UK is a little bit more stable. And we were seen by many as being a kind of positive influence within the machinations of the EU. And of course, now we're no longer there. But anyway, I digress. This is about, talking about I'll probably dip into this when I have a little bit more time, but Sikorsky is certainly one I think that speaks an awful lot of sense. In fact, no, I won't, because I forgot that Anton Gerashchenko has summed it up. So this is, I forgot about This is what Sikorski says. So Poland backs the right of Ukraine to strike at military targets inside Russia. The West has to stop constantly limiting itself in what it does to support Ukraine. So that's Sikorski on board. That's a Polish effectively on board with being able to strike within Russia. On sanctions, quote, we should drop the principle of unanimity in sanctions. Some of them have been delayed by one member state blocking them. I wonder who that is, Hungary. And also it should be an EU crime to breach EU sanctions and therefore prosecutable by the European Prosecution Service. Interesting, yes. Third point, on Putin, quote, he is an absurd leader of the international conservatism. We are talking about a KGB colonel, for Christ's sake. Ouch. Interesting that Biden today called him a brutal tyrant. Now, we can take that for granted now because we've been 2 years into a war, and I always talk about him as just a narcissistic, megalomaniacal dictator, and I'll slag off Putin and call him out for what he is. But actually, to have the US president say that of Putin is really freaking significant. 5 years ago, if Biden or Trump or whoever had called Putin a brutal tyrant, that would have been massive news. That's an international fracas in the making. Now, many people won't have even picked this up, but it's a huge thing for Biden to call him a brutal tyrant. It's absolutely correct, but it shows how degraded that relationship between those two nations, basically between Russia and everyone in the West, has now become. On whether it's permissible for Ukraine to strike military targets inside Russia, again, quote, the Russians are hitting the Ukrainian electricity grid and their grain terminals and gas storage capacity, civilian infrastructure. The Russian operation is conducted from the HQ at Rostov-on-Don. Apart from not using nuclear weapons, Russia does not limit itself much. And on red lines, quote, always declaring what our own red line is only invites Moscow to tailor its hostile actions to our constantly changing self-imposed limitations. Brilliant stuff. It's what Gabrielis Landsbergis has been saying recently. It's what Emmanuel Macron came out and said and started to change the conversation with, all those months ago now. Really good from Sikorski, a lot of time for him. Now, I've already talked to you about this. I went through this article earlier because it pertained to my military aid video, but it's worth reminding you that Jens Stoltenberg has been in The Economist, interviewed, and wants to free Ukraine to strike hard inside Russia. So he's very much in line with what Sikorski was saying as well. Just a reminder there. Nate, and the important part that I pointed out at the end of that article is what Next to Here actually points out, and I think more people need to realize how significant this is, and we're going to return to this during this video. So NATO may invoke Article 5 on collective defense in case of a serious cyber attack on one of the alliance countries. The NATO Secretary General stated this in an interview with The Economist, quote, we can invoke Article 5 and respond in cyberspace and in other areas to protect NATO allies. But he said if it was, major enough, what was the word he used? Significant enough. No, it wasn't significant. Anyway, there's a grey area. Where's the demarcation of what is big enough to trigger Article 5 in the cyber domain, and what's not. And so that there does need some clarification there. If you're just going to be feeling for the right answer to that, then you'll end up just saying, oh no, that's not quite enough. Oh no, it's not quite enough. I think you need to be really strong on this, because Russia are just going to push the envelope every single time, continually. Now, on the idea of attacking Russian territory with Western munitions, the German Greens, the politician Anton Hofreiter, has spoken out in favour of no longer preventing Ukraine from attacking. They are in coalition with the SPD, and that is good that it's coming from them. And the Greens are they're an interesting party in Germany because they appear to be far more robust in their defence of Ukraine, their support of Ukraine. And here is another example of that. We've had Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister, who's a Green Party parliamentarian, doing an awful lot for Ukraine. So they appear to be a really positive coalition partner in that. In government at the moment. Now, Politico has a massive article. This is a big, long read, and it pertains mainly to Jan Marsalek, and I've already spoke I've already done a whole segment on Jan Marsalek, or the CEO of Wirecard, and his involvement with the Russian, with the Kremlin, and being an agent for Russia. So this article is largely about him and Austria's connection to the Kremlin. I have Benny Pye, who's a viewer of this channel, and he's on Discord as well. He is putting together, I think he already has, I so need to speak to him. He is trawling all of my content with AI to turn it into, to summarize it, and so hopefully you can search my videos. Now, why that is going to be really useful, I was thinking about this today, and Benny, sorry I haven't got back to you. I know you've messaged me a bunch of times. I often think, I've done a video on that, but I've done like thousands of videos now, and because I don't have time to put like tags in each individual video for each individual subject I talk about, I just physically don't have the time. That's a really great way. So I can search for Jan Marsalek, hopefully, and be able to find what video that was in out of all the thousands of videos, and then go, there you go, that's the video I was talking about. If you want to know more about that, go and check this video out. So yeah, hopefully that's a good development of what I can provide here. And thanks so much to other people. I have no idea how to do those things, obviously. Anyway, this is how this Politico article is: Putin hijacked Austria's spy service. Now he's going after its government. Intelligence officials suspect Wirecard CEO Marsalek of colluding with the far-right Freedom Party on Moscow's behalf. So the FPO is a Freedom Party, which would previously have been seen alongside, say, UKIP in the UK, a Eurosceptic right-wing party, like the AfD, like the National Rally in France. It's exactly the same kind of, what I would call a faux libertarian party. So they say like a freedom party, any party that says we're a freedom party and we're talking about we should be free, we should have less government, we should do this, but by the way, immigrants can't move, like people can't move. We're going to restrict you from moving. I thought you were about freedom. No, people can't move. Like the first freedom you'd expect, just to move. You can't move. You can't move in here. You can't come here. Which is fair enough, but don't call yourself a freedom party. Don't call yourself a libertarian. So if you look at true libertarian parties, go and look at the Libertarian Party for the US. And I've done this because I've written articles on this. I've written articles on faux libertarianism. The UKIP, so Nigel Farage said we're a libertarian party, and they're like, yeah, you're trying to restrict where people move. You're trying to restrict, things like bodily autonomy and all these things. Like, are you really libertarian? So when you look at Ayn Rand, who was she a first generation, second generation illegal immigrant? For the first generation, she was a legal immigrant from Russia. Ayn Rand, the original libertarian who wrote Atlas Shrugged, first generation illegal immigrant from Russia. She was an atheist, and she was all for bodily autonomy. In other words, pro-choice, because that's kind of like the human is a god. We should have all these freedoms. The government should go and sort off. Now, I don't agree with libertarianism. However, you can't hold up Atlas Shrugged and say, I'm a libertarian, and then just put all these constraints on people. Right. Anyway, but to get back to the point in hand, because I know immigration is a really sticky subject and people feel very strongly on it. And it, is not an easy subject. But the FPO is that kind of party, as far as I understand it. So you've got this honey trap, how Russia recruited Marsalek, and how he used. So goes through all the story about him and how he infiltrated the Russians, the Ukrainian spy. Oh, I get it right. The Austrian spy service, Marsalek's Austro-Russian network, and their secret dossier. As you can see, it's a huge old. I love that. A huge old article. This Austria's far right versus the deep state. So then it's like getting into bed with the FPO and their involvement, and other people like Ott and Weiss, so on and so forth. I don't have time to go through all of it now. And Marsalek's plan to remake Austria's spy service, and he's actually he's not been captured. I think, is he in Dubai or somewhere? Vienna tries and fails to shut Marsalek down, and it goes on, as you can see, huge. And then we're going to join it just at the end here. Though authorities suspected the Russians had a hand in Weiss and Ott, so two others' dealings, it wasn't until late last year that they discovered the depth of Moscow's involvement. In September, and I reported this to you, British counterintelligence, this is when I talked about it, British counterintelligence broke up an alleged UK-based spy ring of 6 Bulgarians that authorities say worked for Marsalek. So if you remember, there were some arrests of Bulgarians in the UK that were working on behalf of the Russians. Most surprising was that Ott appeared to have continued. As part of the UK probe, investigators stumbled on a chat communications between the ring's alleged leader, Orlin Rusev, so that Bulgarian ring, and Marsalek, that pointed to intensive engagement by Moscow. Most surprising was that Ott, another person, appeared to have continued to work for Marsalek unabated even after his 2021 arrest. In June 2022, for example, he allegedly handed over 3 mobile phones that had belonged to senior Austrian officials to Marsalek's Bulgarian crew. I believe this happened on some kind of cruise, on some kind of boat, and he got hold of them. They got wet, and he said he would fix them or something like that. They'd fallen in the water or something like that. He got these phones, and then basically, I think, mirrored the data on it or whatever, and then given them straight to the Russians. So the Russians had 3 mobile phones from like people high up in Austria. Anyway, something like that. He handed 3 mobile phones that belonged to senior Austrian officials to Marsalek's Bulgarian crew. Ott acquired the phones from a former colleague in the BVT, according to Austrian law enforcement. I think is that the Austrian Secret Services. According to the chat communications recovered by British authorities, Marsalek was in constant contact with his agents during the Austrian visit, even asking one to purchase 2 Sakatorta, the Viennese chocolate cake, on their way home. A few months later, Ott delivered a so-called Signer laptop, a highly encrypted computer used by German intelligence, to Marsalek's helpers in return for €20,000, authorities say. Police discovered 2 more of the laptops during a search of Ott's home. I mean, it's incredible, like all the data he managed to be able to get, this other chap, Ott. And then it's talking about, well, look, if the FPO get in, this sort of far right, and they are gaining, as we see right across Europe, they are gaining popularity in Austria. If the FPO wins, says Politico, and forms a government, both Ott and Weiss, who remains in Dubai, sorry, it's not Marsalek, it's these other people, which doesn't have an extradition treaty with Austria, may yet get a reprieve. The bigger question for Europe is what an FPO-led government would mean for Vienna and its broader relationship with Moscow. So these guys seem to be associated with the FPO, and therefore it's thought that if they get in, then they may not be held to account for their pro-Kremlin activities. Austria's critics argue that the country is already dangerously dependent on Russia. The centre-right government might take a tough line on Moscow in public, they say, but it has dragged its feet when it comes to disentangling Austria's economy from Russia. So their present government at the moment is centre-right, not the far-right that the FPO arguably is. The country has been slow to wean itself off Russian energy, despite persistent pressure from Brussels and Washington. For example, in the financial sector, Austrian-owned Raiffeisen Bank International continues to operate, one of the largest retail banks in Russia, despite a long-standing pledge to withdraw. If Moscow really was behind the effort to take over Austria's spy service, as Western intelligence officials claim, it's clear that Russians regard the country as an important prize and are willing to go to great lengths to influence its politics. In the Kremlin's effort, Krikl and the FPO proved at worst eager accomplices and at best useful idiots. Though Krikl, I presume he's the FPO politician, hasn't been an overtly pro-Russian as some of his colleagues, he has been a vocal opponent of European sanctions against Moscow, surprise, surprise, and critical of Western military aid support for Ukraine. Surprise, surprise. With Krikl as Chancellor, so the FPO having a Chancellor, it's a safe bet that Vienna would pursue even closer economic ties with Moscow. And with both Slovakia and Hungary already leaning towards Russia, Austria's entry into the Kremlin sphere of influence could create a Putin-friendly box stretching from the Carpathians to the Eastern Alps, posing a fundamental challenge to European security. This is frickin' serious, right? If the rest of Europe is surprised by the Austrian turn, it shouldn't be. Putin has never made his interest in the country a secret. In 2018, just months after the BVT raid, he accepted an invitation from the Austro-Russian Friendship Society to celebrate 50 years of Russian gas deliveries to the country. Several weeks later, he returned for Neisel's wedding. If you remember, there was a woman was she the foreign minister? And he went to her wedding, and it's like, this is how close Austria are to Russia. Describing herself as a political refugee, the former foreign minister has since left Austria and is now runs a think tank in St. Petersburg. Who knew? Quote, we've had very good and close relations with Austria for a long time, Putin told Austrian television just months after the raid on the BBT. Quote, Austria has traditionally been a reliable partner for us in Europe. Yes, they are, and that is a freaking problem. Okay, so then, as if that wasn't worrying enough, Putin has declared war on British democracy, writes Ivana Stradner, the Balkans expert, in the Daily Telegraph today. So she says, but with the UK scheduled to hold elections on July the 4th, as has been warned only today, Moscow, or the other day now, Moscow will not miss an opportunity to destabilise the country as profoundly as possible. Britain must be prepared, and not just Britain. According to intelligence reports, Russia plans to interfere in political processes during the EU elections in June and the US elections in November. Western intelligence agencies have already warned that Moscow is plotting acts of sabotage across Europe. In May, Anne Keast-Butler, the director of GCHQ, so British intelligence, earlier warned that Russia is preparing cyber attacks and worse, against the UK. It is in cyber and information operations that Moscow can arguably be most deadly, aiming to exploit hot-button domestic issues and weaken support for Ukraine. It's what I warn about all the freaking time. Russia has a long history of meddling in UK affairs. The British Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee stated that Russia interfered in the 2014 Scottish independence referendum. This September marks the 10th anniversary. It is yet to be seen if there will be a second after the leader of Scotland, First Minister Humza Yousaf, resigned in April. Nevertheless, Scottish independence aspirations are still alive and ripe for Russia's manipulation. Russian government-run RT even has a subsection on its website titled Scotland Referendum. Now, of course, because the Daily Telegraph is very pro-Brexit and a right-wing newspaper itself, it doesn't talk about what we know is definitely the Russian interference in the Brexit referendum as well. It chooses a Scottish referendum and just gives a few details there. So she knows her audience there, Ivana Stradner. However, it goes on saying Moscow is now adept at exploiting culture wars and portraying that Britain is an imperialistic, colonial and racist country. And so, as I've said, Russia is very good at taking issues that already might exist. It doesn't make up things out of whole cloth. It does do that as well, actually. But what it's very good at doing is taking issues and amplifying them and driving that wedge into a crack to make it become a chasm and divides any given nation that they are doing information attacks on. And she finishes, as such, the UK needs to put the Kremlin on the defensive in the information space and aggressively counter Russian narratives. This is what I've been talking about for so long. Moscow is interfering with democratic institutions, and it's time for Britain to take action. Exposing Putin's propaganda is a good first step, as is the use of sanctions in name and shame to name and shame individuals involved in Russian and information warfare. But more needs to be done. London should launch offensive information operations in Moscow's sphere of influence so its information warriors spend time, energy and resources defending Russia rather than attacking. The UK has powerful information warfare capabilities and understands Moscow's thinking. The time to act is now. Really good stuff from Stradner there. Now, going across to the US, Antony Blinken is to visit Moldova and the Czech Republic to discuss support for Ukraine. So it's keeping those nations that are in a general same kind of orbit as, say, Hungary, Austria and Slovakia that we just mentioned. Moldova and Czech Republic are very strongly supportive of Ukraine, where Slovakia is a bit more divided. But anyway, Blinken's going over there. US Secretary of State will travel to Czech Republic and Moldova next week and to attend an informal meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Prague. And that's going to be interesting. Now, talking about influence operations or maybe just outright espionage, this has just happened in North Carolina. Mysterious shooting outside Army Special Forces residence in North Carolina raises questions. So what's happened here? Well, two Chechen men who spoke broken English were found near a soldier's home. The family alleges a suspected intruder, 35-year-old Ramzan Daryev of Chicago, was taking photos of their children. When confronted near a power line in a wooded part of the property, an altercation ensued and Daryev was shot several times at close range. A second man, Jan Tukov, Jankutov Adsalan was in a vehicle some distance from the incident and was questioned by authorities and then released. The Moore County Sheriff's Office is leading the investigation. The FBI told Fox News, quote, "Our law enforcement partners at the Moore County Sheriff's Office contacted the FBI after a shooting death in Carthage," that's North Carolina. "A special agent met with investigators and provided a linguist to assist with a language barrier for interviews." Sheriff Ronnie Fields said in a statement, quote, "The caller indicated that an individual was observed taking photographs on the property and had become aggressive towards a resident outside their home. The deceased was found approximately 250 yards away from the roadway along a power line on the residential property. Identification was not initially found on Dariev. However, his identity was later confirmed through family members and an international identification located in his vehicle. The shooter has been identified as a colonel with the US Army who resided at the location of the shooting. US Special Operations soldiers around the country have experienced strange interactions in recent years, and they say involved suspicious surveillance of them and their families. Many believe that US military bases have become an increasing target of foreign probes." It goes on to talk a lot more. We won't go into details, but further details. But it is. So what could have happened here? It could have just been a guy gets a bit testy and ends up shooting some people, and maybe they were innocent, but it is weird that two Chechen people certainly seem to be hanging outside Special Forces residence taking photographs, if that is indeed, that last part is indeed true, and an altercation ensues and one of them gets shot dead. So who knows exactly what's going on, but it looks fairly much like we've got some Russian influence in the US. So when I have arguments with people online, as I've recently on Twitter, I was arguing with someone that seems to have gone down this pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine route in a typical sort of Trumpian fashion, and he's like just taken a wholesale that whole. Is just his whole politics has shifted to there from when he used to write with me years back. And he's got hook, line and sinker, the whole stuff. And all the arguments he was presenting were just Russian talking points. But one of the strongest comebacks to that kind of thinking is they're freaking cyber attacking the US. Like, what are you doing about that? Like, is that cool? Now, he said to that, and I said, do you realise that they've cyber attacked water treatment plants? Was it Pennsylvania? He's like, oh, they're always cyber attacking. He's like, oh, that's fine then. As I said the other day, it's like, trying to justify someone murdering someone. Oh, there's always lots of murders. It's my sister's just been murdered. Yeah, it's all right. There are lots of murders. Yeah, it's not cool. So there's that kind of weirdness and justification. But here is like, okay, Russians are doing espionage I expect you would say, yeah, we've been doing that at the Cold War all the time. Yeah. Because they were your enemy and you are their enemy. So stop trying to get so close to Russia and say, we're all right with Russia. It's Ukraine that's corrupt and the bad guys and blah, blah, blah. When Russia are still openly doing espionage and trying to get a military advantage over you in some kind of sense here. And indeed, as this Fox News report suggests, this is not an isolated incident. This has been happening. This happens 2 to 3 times a week.
Our military bases getting penetrated by foreign nationals is happening more and more. This is something we see probably 2 or 3 times a week where we're stopping these folks at the gate. Typically, we get NCIS involved with those and we get biometrics when possible. But yes, there's been an uptick in that.
Brett, we will keep reporting on the case in Carthage, North Carolina, about what this mysterious case, which, again, has many in the special operations community very spooked.
So this is, nothing may come of it, or it might be a serious kind of espionage incident. But this is not uncommon. Like, we need to remember, Americans need to remember who the good guys are. Or not even remember, like, understand that Ukraine's not doing stuff like this. Russia's doing stuff like this. They need to remember the Cold War. I think you got to a point where so many people have forgotten. It just almost seems like another era now. But Russia hasn't forgotten. Anyway, that's pretty worrying. And when you do have cyber attacks on places, like France had Russian cyber attacks on their hospital networks some time back. Here, Jay Healy says, feels like we should be talking about this more. What's he talking about? So a paper's come out, and here's a quote from the paper. In hospital mortality for patients already hospitalised at a ransomware-attacked hospital, increases between 1.28 and 1.87%, representing a 35.9 to 55.3% relative increase when compared to pre-attack mean. In other words, on average, people who are getting treated in a hospital that has been ransomware attacked are more likely to die. There's a statistically significant difference between hospitals that aren't cyber attacked and hospitals that are. And it affects the mortality rates. In other words, in simple speak, cyber attacks actually kill people. So when you're talking about state actors doing cyber attacks, you go, oh, it's okay, they just... they're always doing that. The Russians, silly them. If they're doing cyber attacks on hospital networks like in France, and that's resulting in deaths, that's the same as a Russian agent coming over to France or to the US and shooting someone in the head and then leaving. Would you accept that? No, you wouldn't. So we have this weird scenario where cyber warfare's okay, but actual warfare's not, even though functionally they can be the same. Go figure. A group of countries, including the Baltic states, Poland, Norway and Finland, have agreed to create a drone wall to help defend their collective borders. Lithuanian Interior Minister Agne Bolitate has said in an interview published yesterday. This is kind of similar to how Romania and Greece have been talking about setting up a European shield for air defences. Drone shield here, air defence shield there. Europe or countries within Europe are thinking, these alliances are going to be important for protecting all of us. And if we get together and do it, it's cheaper and more effective, and we can pool our expertise. It's much easier to have a neighbourhood watch going on for all this neighbourhood, where we get together and we share out the burden of looking after each other's houses, rather than me looking after my house the whole time. Then I go on holiday and no one's looking after it. That kind of thing. This is the power of alliances and collective activity, I guess. Okay, going to Georgia. It is still a site of an awful lot of protests going on, and I think that's a good thing. 200 have been arrested. That was yesterday already in an ongoing, or that might be in total, I don't know, at an ongoing anti-Russian protest in Tbilisi, it's the capital of Georgia. Getting the Russians out is always a lot harder than letting them in. So it's great to see that Georgia is still protesting, and it's going on today still. So that was from yesterday. This is today. Happening now in Tbilisi, Georgian University teaches students protesting against Russian-style foreign agent law. I think that might have been... Yeah, it was yesterday. Good. I always have to check myself. Accuracy. Georgian University teaches students protest against Russian-style foreign agent law. Adopted on the 14th of May, the law is expected to strangle civil society and thus bring Georgia closer to Russia and away from Europe. Protest comes after yesterday's mass march to Interior Ministry in support of 200 plus detained protesters. So that's what JNQ was talking about. Another mass protest is expected on the 26th, which is tomorrow, which is Georgia's Independence Day. And lots of footage coming out of these very sizable protests. And indeed, I mean, goodness me, this is pretty significant. So Euromaidan Press showing these images here. That's incredible and really good stuff. Mass protests against the Russian-style foreign agents bill. Yep, all the same sort of stuff there. Lots of flags being waved, Ukrainian, Georgian, EU, and even US flags. So interesting there. Lots of noise, lots of protests. Right, we're going to finish on China. 2 years of escalation management. Congratulations to Sullivan. Jake Sullivan is certainly the boogeyman of a lot of people. Okay, what's going on here? Quote, the Biden administration is increasingly concerned that the intensifying military alliance between Putin and Kim Jong-un could vastly expand Pyongyang's nuclear capabilities and increase tensions in the Asia-Pacific region, according to NBC News. Are Russia and North Korea planning an October surprise that aids Trump? Don't know what to think about that, because actually Trump is. I don't think China would want Trump, because Trump's promised he's promised tariffs on all Chinese imports, which I think would be economic suicide for the US. I think you'd have to be very careful of how you did that. I'm not saying you shouldn't have any kind of protectionism going on, but I think just a mass. You could start something really big, both economically but politically as well, and also it would just cause mass inflation for the US. Interesting. And, people that don't agree with me politically say I shouldn't talk on these different topics. When I cast my opinion on this, it's like, you don't know anything, blah blah blah, and they say you can't speak about this. Like, freedom of speech and blah blah blah. But it's more likely I do know what I'm talking about, at least a lot of the time, and it's just you just disagree with my position. I said something about immigration the other day, about how if you deported 15 million people, it would have prima facie inflationary effect and an inflationary effect on the US economy. And someone's like, you know what you're talking about, blah 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 blah, and I was like, and then said a load of things which is mere assertions, right, that were tangentially related, not on the inflation point, but tangentially related. I'm like, dude, if you are going to say I don't know what I'm talking about, and then give me some assertions that have absolutely no substantiation, like, if you're going to call me out properly, bring receipts. And I then presented a load of statistics and articles and journal entries that was like, here are all your points, and they're all wrong. They're all empirically wrong. Here you are. I've been doing this kind of stuff for 15 years. I don't know, it sounds a little really like, what, really contrived or whatever. No, that's the wrong word. Patronizing, isn't it? But like I argue all the time, and I know that if I do make assertions, I've got to know that back behind my assertion, my justification is evidence-based. So when I do make big claims, it's because I've been arguing and writing about this for 15 years, and I do have a bank of data that I can draw on, that I know is there. So if I ever do make that assertion, it isn't just picking it out of my arse because I want that to be true, right? And so if you're going to do that to me, that sometimes people come at me and disagree with me, but then pick things out their arse. It's like just an assertion. That is, and I can tell by the way they're phrased, they're just, this is what you want to be true. Because anyway, so just a bit of house clearing there. Like, by all means, disagree with me, but come at me with receipts, please. But anyway, that's nothing to do with this. So China and North Korea getting a bit cozy there. Now, Jürgen nailed it. Well, the global press here says China intends to attack Taiwan in early June. Holy crapola. Right, if that was true, which is, a couple of days away, that's serious. I can see rationale that China might want to do that because Ukraine hasn't been so strongly defended by other Western allies and whatnot, and that it could be a case of we're all distracted by Ukraine and Taiwan, and we're left going like Bruder Zaz between two, not knowing which one to do, and doing neither very good, or we could react all in terms of like, this is World War III. Let's sort out Ukraine. Let's sort out Taiwan as well. This is serious, and now we all need to get onto a proper war footing. I don't know if China really have the gall to do an attack on Taiwan, quite frankly, right now. And this could just be like alarmism. But, today the People's Republic of China began large-scale military exercises surrounding Taiwan on all sides. Global press doesn't have a crystal ball, but I wish my friends in Taiwan all the best, says Jürgen nailed it. I'd agree. I think this is just ramping it up. I'm not saying it won't happen at some point, but goodness me, I obviously hope it doesn't happen. But if the US, because I only say the US because so many in the US have been saying, well, we should be spending our money on Taiwan. The best money spent on Taiwan is spent on Ukraine. And a really robust repudiation of the Russian invasion would have sent a very strong message to China. And if we'd all got together, EU, and did much quicker what we are doing now, but doing too slowly, and it's allowing Ukraine to be bled dry. If we just went all in, it would have sent the clearest message to China. Like, if you want to mess with us, honestly, go and attack Taiwan. But I'd advise against it. But now we're like, oh, we half help them, and then don't attack Taiwan. And you're thinking, yeah, I could see that China is learning from this and learning that actually we are not as effective at pulling together to defend nations like Ukraine and Taiwan as really we should have been. Anyway, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Sorry, it's been a lot of me rambling on, but you know what I'm like by now, surely. I do appreciate your support. Take care and enjoy the rest of the weekend.